Hi, I'm Sheena Brevig, and welcome to Sib as a Human, a space where siblings of people with disabilities can explore the beautiful, messy, and often complex journey of being a Sib. If you're tuning in, chances are you know what it's like to love someone deeply while carrying the weight of experiences that shaped you in ways that maybe everyone doesn't understand. You might be incredibly empathetic and maybe really sensitive, but also burnt out and maybe struggling with boundaries. You might feel guilty for having your own needs, or find yourself putting everyone else first and wondering, what do I actually want? Who am I beyond just taking care of people? Here's what I want you to know. You and your experiences matter, and not just because you're a Sib or a natural caretaker. Your story matters, your authentic self matters. On this podcast, we'll have honest conversations about how we as Sibs can better understand ourselves, learn to have love and compassion for ourselves, and step into living our fullest, most authentic lives. We'll explore what it means to work on our relationship with ourselves, not just as Sibs, but as whole human beings with our own dreams, struggles, and identities beyond being a Sib. This isn't about sugarcoating the hard parts or pretending everything is fine. This is about holding space for the full spectrum of our experience and finding ways to honor both our love for our siblings and our commitment to our own growth and well-being. So, whether you're just starting to explore what it means to be a Sib, or you've been on this journey for years, or maybe you have a Sib in your life that you love and you want to understand better. Whatever got you here, you belong, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to our first episode on Sib as a Human. I'm so excited we're finally here. I wanted to share a little bit about this project, this podcast. So the first thing I should probably say is I am a Sib. I have a sibling with a disability. My younger brother has cerebral palsy. I didn't know about the term Sib until adulthood. And as I learned more about being a Sib and as I learned more about myself, I realized that there is this whole network of Sibs out there who have similar experiences to myself. What I realized, though, was a lot of the resources and support for Sibs still were focused on Sibs as the advocate for their sibling or the caregiver for their sibling. And there wasn't a space where we were focusing on just us as whole people. So I approached the folks at the Sibling Leadership Network, this amazing organization, which you'll hear a little bit more about soon, about the idea of doing a podcast that is fully centered on the Sib experience and supporting Sibs' emotional and mental wellness. And Kaitlin McNamara, the organization's executive director, was really enthusiastic about this idea, so we decided to partner on this project. I could not be bringing this to you all without her and without the SLN, so big thank you to everyone there. And Kaitlin will actually be joining me in a little bit to share about her experience as a Sib. I knew the things that I wanted to talk about. I knew the things I wanted to learn more about, and I also found myself wondering, well, what about other Sibs? What are other Sibs thinking about and experiencing? And I wanted to know what mattered to them. So we ended up developing a survey. We were thrilled to see that over 100 Sibs responded, and they shared their experiences with us. They shared their stories with us. It was not only validating for me to hear and read your responses, but then it really made me realize that we are all dealing with such similar things, and we don't have a space to discuss it. So again, that further motivated us to bring this podcast to life. And Kaitlin and I will also share some of those results of the survey later in today's episode. We'll share what Sibs are thinking about, grappling with, and wanting to talk about. And on this show, we're planning on talking about it. So before I have Kaitlin join me, though, I wanted to share more about my own journey of how I recognized the fact that being a Sib highly impacted the way I move through this world and what that looked like for my own physical, mental, and emotional well-being, which ultimately is the backstory as to how this podcast came to be. So a little bit about me. Growing up, as I mentioned, I have a younger brother with cerebral palsy. If you have a sibling that has an accident or an incident that disables them in some way, or they develop certain kinds of illnesses, you can become a Sib later in life. In my case, I have always been a Sib as long as I've been a sibling. My brother having cerebral palsy was my normal, and I grew up being really helpful. I, was the easy kid, and I really prided myself in being great at anticipating people's needs. I didn't know this then, but In therapy and adulthood, I learned that my self-worth was really externalized because I was basing it off of how other people were perceiving me, how useful I was to other people, etc. I just thought I was an emotional person, but I look back and I can see now that I really struggled with managing big emotions, right? I thought I was just a Pisces and therefore I cried a lot, but turns out I did not know emotional or self-regulation. Something that I really struggled with was I did not even know how to identify my own needs, and I minimized my own needs, and I didn't know how to understand or express the emotions I was experiencing. And for me, that meant internalizing things and suppressing things. And that resulted in a lot of GI issues. So for most of my young adolescence into early adulthood, I really struggled with IBS. And I finally reached a point where I was like, okay, I just need to figure this out. I started going to all these different doctors and everyone was like, you're healthy. And I'm like, I'm not okay. I was in so much discomfort all the time. Then I started exploring wellness more holistically. And I started going to an acupuncturist and I started seeing a therapist. And along the way there, I also started connecting with other Sibs. I had a therapist a decade ago who was the first person to be like, it's okay to say, sometimes it really sucks or sometimes it's really hard to have a disabled sibling. And I looked at her and I was like, nope, I can't say that. And also, that's not true. I really did not allow myself to feel the hard feelings of what it meant to be a Sib. I felt like I was so lucky to be the one that was not disabled. I felt like, therefore, I had to be so grateful, only grateful. I really could not acknowledge the impact of what it was like to grow up with a disabled sibling, because in so many ways I had a really beautiful childhood, but I hadn't understood what the impact was for myself in terms of growing up with someone in the family who just needed a lot more time and attention and resources, and how then I learned to make myself smaller and try to not be a burden in any way, try not to put more stress on my family's plate. I began connecting with other Sibs, especially Sibs of color and queer Sibs. And there were so many moments where I started feeling like, oh my gosh, me too. It started to help me better understand myself and start considering the fact that maybe growing up as a Sib wasn't just the silver linings I thought it was. And maybe there were some things that were really challenging and actually impacting me really significantly in adulthood. Years later from that original therapist, where I just was in full denial that I had any challenges, I was looking for a new therapist, and in a consult, I was describing what I was experiencing of big emotions and having a hard time coming back to center and regulating, and all these other symptoms. And the therapist was like, you actually need to see a trauma specialist. What you're describing is complex PTSD, CPTSD. I was like, wait, me? CPTSD? What are you talking about? But in learning more about that, I learned that a lot of Sibs actually experience symptoms of CPTSD. And we will also get more into that on another episode. But when I finally accepted and started naming my experiences, I was able to then find a therapist who I'm still working with today, who I love, and has actually been able to really help me learn tools of self-regulation, understand why and how codependent patterns show up so that I can work on that and show up in my relationships in much healthier ways. So I could also look at my hyper-independence, which is something a lot of Sibs deal with. As I was on this journey of my own mental health and connecting with other Sibs along the way, we were all connecting around perfectionism and burnout and all these things that we were starting to notice, whether it was me individually in therapy or in these group conversations, were tied to how I grew up. While it's so important to also remember the beautiful parts of being a Sib, those are the things that are usually highlighted in society, in media, in conversations. We can't keep overlooking the hard parts, and we need spaces to talk about the paradox of holding love and resentment at the same time, of being a sibling and also playing a parental role to that sibling, because it's leading so many Sibs to spaces where they're really struggling and or trying to navigate dealing with anxiety, depression, burnout, codependency, CPTSD, and so much more. With all of that, again, I came to Kaitlin at the SLN and was like, we need a space to talk about it. So that's what we're trying to do. Before I bring Kaitlin on, I just wanted to touch on some language. So I've been using this term SIB, just short for sibling, this whole time. And another term that folks might be familiar with is a glass child. They're not called a glass child because they're fragile or fragile like glass, but it's often because they grow up feeling unseen or seen through, right? And it's not because we were ignored as children, but just because the family's focus tended to be pulled towards the sibling who needed more, we often felt invisible and unseen. We like the term SIB because it's neutral in a lot of ways. Glass child kind of evokes a certain, image of pity or fragility that I just don't love. And the SLN has been using SIB for a long time as well. So that's the term we'll be using in this space. The thing about glass children or Sibs is that many of them become helpers, caretakers, or peacekeepers. And other common symptoms are that they often hide their own feelings to avoid causing more stress for the family. Again, and I look back now and I'm like, I was such a classic case. If only I had known. So as you heard from my story, and as we saw in our sibling survey, over time growing up this way can really impact how we as Sibs see ourselves. It can impact our self-esteem, how we relate to others, the types of work we go into, the types of relationships we find ourselves in, how we cope or don't cope with stress. So with that, I want to welcome my first guest, Kaitlin McNamara, who is the executive director of this wonderful organization called the Sibling Leadership Network, or the SLN, and is herself a Sib. The purpose of the SLN is to support siblings of individuals with disabilities to navigate systems, promote continual connection, create inclusive policy, and advocate for the needs of ourselves and our families throughout our lives. Kaitlin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's the culmination of a lot of conversation, and I'm very excited to be here.
I would love to first have you just share with everyone a bit about your journey and kind of recognizing how being a Sib has impacted you in your life, and then a little bit more about the SLN.
Absolutely. I am the oldest daughter. There's four girls in my family. I think there is a tendency to think of Sibs classically as oldest daughters, but that is not by any means the norm. I just happen to play that more stereotypical role of eldest daughter. Two of my sisters identify as women with disabilities. I have a sister, Kelsey. She's an artist. She is autistic and has a developmental disability. I have another sister, Anne Marie. She is a nurse and she suffered a traumatic brain injury in high school and has had to navigate the complexity of acquiring a disability at a pretty critical moment in her life. And my youngest sister, Audrey, who is more than 10 years my junior, lives in Milwaukee with me. We get to be roommates, which is very exciting. We are and have always been very, very close siblings, and I'm very privileged to get to say that. That was more, I think, a byproduct of the fact that we were pretty nomadic in our childhood. Like, we moved quite a lot. We were a very tight unit of sisters. I relied pretty heavily on that identity and have relied heavily on that identity for most of my life. I am also first generation in that my father is an immigrant, and so part of our experience is also very much tied to their navigating American systems for the first time. Both my parents are the first in their families to go to college, so navigating a lot of new systems has always kind of been part of our experience. And I spent a lot of time in a sort of caretaker, parentified role as a result of both the moving and my age and the new experiences we were constantly having. and the need. There was a lot of support needs going on at different junctures in our life, and not a lot of external support outside of the family structure that was available. Some because it was asked of me, and some because I could just see a need that was being unmet. I continuously stepped up to play different roles that, maybe in a different family structure would have not been asked or required or noticed.
Can you define parentified for all of us?
Absolutely, yeah. So parentification is one of those words that gets used with siblings or sibs a lot because it is when a sibling is asked to a child who's still developing is being asked to take on more adult responsibilities that might be caretaking of children as a common parentification. It may be supporting the functioning of the house, doing chores or handling responsibilities that are sort of past their developmental age, so that the family can continue to survive and function. And so it's this forced growing up that happens for some sibs where they play more of a parent role in maybe their sibling's life, or they play more of an adult role in their family structure than their developmental age would typically require of them.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think you said when children are kind of asked to step into that role, and the asking, like you said, might be explicit, but often it's not, right? To your point, you
A
might have,
hundred
as a
percent.
sib, just noticed, oh,
Yeah.
mom's stressed out. How can I, if I help my sibling put their clothes on or help them brush their teeth, then mom can do that other thing. And then suddenly you're like fighting yourself, being like, oh, I feel like a third parent in this household or just an additional parent, depending on your family system.
Yeah, yeah, it's exactly that. I think, at least in my experience, more of it came from just noticing what was happening and noticing what was needed and trying to make things go more smoothly because I was aware that without additional support, the stress of what my family was experiencing was creating an uncomfortability in our lives. And I thought that there was a role I could play in removing that feeling by being more aware of people's needs and by being more in tune to what would get us through the day smoothly. For so much of my life, I didn't have any kind of language that would help me explain this to anybody else. It wasn't until I went away to school. I was the first in my family to sort of like live away to go to university. I was several hours away, a plane ride away. And that was shocking to my identity and my family unit as a whole.
For me, part of my moving across the country to go to college, part of my living in different cities in my 20s was, I think, fueled by this knowing that at some point I'm going to have to come back and take care of my sibling. It's just me and my brother in my family's case. And I've just always had this knowing that, like, ultimately I will be taking care of my brother. So I think in some ways I kind of was like, now's my chance to leave. But I don't think I had quite the same thing that you're describing. I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about what that shock was for you.
I think my family was so encouraging. I think they were very scared. I don't want to put words necessarily in their mouths about what that experience was like, but I remember going and touring universities with my mom and her having like an actual panic attack at one of the universities when she realized that this is really what I wanted. And, there were so many layers to her desire to give that to me and also what it was going to mean. And so even though there was nobody saying don't do this, and absolutely the opposite was occurring in my life, my family was saying do this, like this is what you deserve, this is what you need to do, there is time for you to reintegrate into a role in the family if that's what you want. I was still aware that it was going to be hard in ways that we had never dealt with before. And it was evident in the ways that we were trying to navigate it that it was going to be a shock to the system that we had developed over time. And it was hard, it was shocking because I had never been just responsible for me. And so I had so much like emotion built up that was normally being expressed externally to, care for people or to manage emotions or to anticipate needs. And I had no skills whatsoever to turn that on myself and use it in that moment when you're
Right.
supposed to like figure out how to live as an individual and as an adult. It seemed like I would be really well prepared for it because I was good at taking care of other people. But I was 100% unprepared for taking care of myself, especially the emotional needs that I was experiencing and the loneliness that I was feeling and the desire to be growing and away and developing in this new way, and also like I had abandoned and was being abandoned by the thing that I knew. And I didn't
Yeah.
know what to do about that. It wasn't just shocking, it was paralyzing. And I spent a lot of time at university feeling paralyzed by all that I was feeling. As I have also gone on a mental health journey and all of those things, a lot of that comes at 18, regardless of who you, right? Like you are just 18, and the life that you have envisioned for yourself is both coming to fruition and very far away from where you are actually at that
Right.
moment. And everything is so impactful because it's so new. It's the first time for everything in your life. And so everything feels bigger just by nature of how young you are.
I so appreciate you saying that. And it's so relatable. I like shared about my journey, but I used a lot of language that I only have now, right? Where I was like,
Yeah.
I was not emotionally regulated. And it was like, I was crying and having like kind of panic attacks that I didn't really know how to, put language to it then. And I felt constantly stressed out. I was constantly running around and busy. I kept myself busy. That's how I avoided my feelings.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know how to rest and relax. And I just was like chronically, like, just like clenched. And
Yeah.
like, I developed like TMJ dysfunction. I like had sleep issues. Like when you're going through it, often you don't know what's happening, but you're just like, is everyone just fine and am I the only one going through this? Or you feel like everyone is going through it, and in some ways that's normalized, right? The chronic busyness, the overly helpfulness, where it's like people in our society, especially for daughters and eldest daughters, and then like for me with Japanese culture, it's like, yes, you should be putting yourself aside and taking care of other people. Like that is what is just like ingrained in you from birth. That's something that people kind of commended me for. I'm curious when other Sibs remember like the first time being like, oh, I'm going to be taking care of this person for the rest of my life. Having that awareness and then trying to be like, what does it look like for me to explore who I am, potentially not at all connected to my sibling or not at all connected to
I
caregiving.
have a little bit of a like inside scoop in that I have other siblings, and so we do have like a range of experiences, and it's so interesting because we grew up in the same house, but sometimes it feels like we did not grow up in the same house at all. And so every one of us comes to this from a very different place. I'm constantly navigating now as an adult how I and how we as a team of siblings approach our long-term plans. And I'll say when I was younger, I had a very like martyr approach to it, and I was really unwilling to sort of dig into whether I wanted to or not. I saw choosing to be the future primary caregiver as a freeing exercise for my other sisters, right? Like if I do it, they don't have to. And so
Totally.
they can just go and live lives that are separate from this responsibility. I didn't investigate whether or not it was something I wanted. I just saw it as an opportunity to give to others again. And it was important for my relationships with them, with all of them, that I navigate and investigate that at some point in my life, because there is no version of that sort of martyrdom that doesn't breed resentment. And whether that's me resenting them for the freedom that I gifted to them, or them resenting me for not giving them the opportunity to participate in that decision. It became very clear at some point that we were going to have to navigate what our future was going to look like together, and that we were going to have to be okay with that kind of constantly changing as well. And so I couldn't, by some miracle, just take care of everybody so that everyone else's lives were pain point free. They went off and built lives, and there was pain and there was learning and there were challenges, regardless of how much effort I was putting into protecting everybody from experiencing that. And I was being sort of eaten alive by that expectation I was putting on myself. And I attribute a lot of our ability to have those conversations both to my better understanding and better language around what it means to be a Sib, at least in our house, but also even in the last sort of 3 years of this job, getting to know so many more Sibs, getting to understand such a range and diversity of experience, and recognizing all of the similarities that our stories have with one another, and all of the ways that people are approaching this differently and still figuring it out, and knowing that there is not a blueprint that I could write up tomorrow to hand a Sib to tell them how to live their lives so that this was easy or free of emotion, but we can have shared language and time and space together that will help us build something for ourselves that's really defined by ourselves as well.
I think that perfectly leads into why we wanted to do this podcast, because both of us were seeing from different angles the fact that the Sib experience often is through a very straight white female, often older or oldest sister lens.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for me, my other historically marginalized identities layer on to my Sib experience in a way that is unique to me and potentially those who share some of those identities. I just remember early on that was something you and I talked about, of how do we approach this as intersectionally as possible and as diverse as possible, while also butting up against the challenge of a lot of people not knowing their Sibs and not knowing Sib communities exist.
Yeah, I think I can be seen oftentimes as some sort of default setting of Sib identity, right? A white, privileged, college educated, financially secure woman, oldest daughter. Like it is what people assume, I think, Sibs look like, or Sib caretakers in particular look like. And I don't have another perspective other than that, but I recognize that so much of how I move through the world is impacted by things other than my Sib identity first. I'm walking into a room as a white woman, and that is how I'm being perceived first and foremost. And so that changes how people interact with me, and I'm very aware of that. We have to be telling not just Sib stories, but the context and the identities that inform all parts of our lives, or we're not being true to the idea that we're whole people. Because a Sib is something that is an identity that maybe we've had our whole lives, but we come to identify with at different points. Our other identities shape so much of the context of our lives too, and that has to be part of the conversation that we're having.
The thing about being a Sib is it's an invisible identity. And I think that's, just another layer to the Sib experience that we're going to try our best to touch upon.
It's also so important that we have so many other Sibs or people working in fields that impact Sibs to be part of these conversations, because I think it is such an expansive need and a group of people that are so profoundly underserved that we need a lot of voices at the table to start to fully get a picture of what Sibs are experiencing and how we can come together to support them. And it's why it was so important for the SLN to partner with something like this project, because our goal is to serve siblings, and we can only serve them well if we know them well. I think we are on a long-term journey of knowing Sibs better, and hearing from them, and recognizing all of the different layers that they bring, not just as caregivers or advocates, but just as people.
Speaking of wanting to understand Sibs better and the variety of Sib experiences out there, we developed this survey, as I mentioned earlier, to try and get a little bit of a snapshot of like, what are Sibs experiencing right now? We asked Sibs to reflect on how much their identity and well-being have been shaped or impacted by being a Sib on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not at all and 5 being profoundly impacted. And 90% of our respondents selected 4 or 5. And of that, 74.3%, so almost 75% of respondents selected number 5. So, this just goes to show that we can't ignore people's Sib identities when we're trying to support them in their well-being.
Yeah, I think once Sibs are able to recognize that in themselves, the identity of being a Sib, they start to realize that it has played a role in their personality development, in the way in which they move through relationships, in the jobs they've chosen, in the communities of support that they build for themselves. And anecdotally, we hear, stories in our communities through the SLN of folks not being able to see anything that happens to them outside of, the role that siblinghood and being a Sib plays. But I think I'm always curious to know, what happens then, right? And I hope that this is a space where we get to talk about, once we're aware that it's impacting us all the time, how do we sit with that and be healthy and whole while knowing that this thing is impacting us all the time?
Right. I think that's really important to say that, like, we're not here on this podcast trying to like blame our parents or blame our disabled siblings, right, or blame ourselves, right? It's like we're trying to find that balance of how do we actually accept the realities of our experiences, the good, the bad, the ugly, in a way where then we can integrate it and we can integrate our Sib identity so that it's not the only thing we lead with, right? Like, Kaitlin, you mentioned how when you were going off to college, you were like, I thought I should be the most equipped to take care of people well, or take care of myself because I take care of other people so well. I was like, oh my gosh, yes, that's exactly how I felt. I didn't understand that until like my late 20s into my early 30s now, where I didn't realize that I didn't know how to answer the question, what do I want? Period. Because I was so good at knowing what everyone else wanted, and I was so good at taking care of everyone else. So it was like, even in a friend group situation, I would just like, without thinking about it, try and peacekeep and or make it the easiest experience for everyone else. And that meant defaulting to what other people wanted, to the point where I was like, I don't actually know what I like. I didn't realize that those aspects of my personality did actually originate from some of the ways that I grew up. And it was leaving me self-abandoning all the time. And therefore, my anxiety, my feelings of loneliness often were coming from the fact that like I was not putting myself first in any way. And that actually brings us to the next piece of the survey, which we asked folks what were some of the top challenges they were experiencing. This was also something where you could select multiple answers. Over 90% of folks feel the pressure of caregiving. Almost 90% of folks deal with challenges with emotional expression. Over 80% of folks reported feeling alone or isolated at times. People also identified that they felt pressure to make life choices around their sibling. They also experienced growing up unable to discuss their own feelings and needs, and expressed the fact that they have challenging family dynamics that they are navigating. We also asked folks, what's the source of this pressure that you might be feeling when we talk about like pressure of caregiving or pressure to make life choices around your sibling? Is that pressure self-imposed? Is it internal or is it external? Is it from your family? Is it from society, etc.? And over 90%, most people said that the pressure they felt was internal. So we as Sibs are putting these pressures on ourselves, and it makes sense. But gosh, when you take a step back and look at all the mental health conditions we're dealing with as well, we're putting so much pressure on ourselves all the time to have it all together, to be perfect, to take care of everyone else.
I think we recognize these things, these questions that we have and this internal pressure at such a young age. It's not a conversation at a young age you really are equipped to start yourself. And so I think because it's just this internal monologue of what am I going to do about the future, and what does caregiving look like, and what do I really want, and can I identify any of these emotions, and all these things, we just stay in this internal monologue. And even as we grow and we age, we don't practice the art of expressing these things or putting them out there in their messiest versions, right? And in particular, we do that because we're in protection mode so much, both of our well-being, but also of our families. And we know that having messy, hard conversations with imprecise language could hurt them because we're still trying to figure out what it is that we're trying to say. And I recognize that as such a barrier to removing some of that internal pressure, is being concerned that by being vulnerable or being imprecise, we are avoiding having to have any kind of really difficult or tough conversation. Hopefully, we as a community can give each other the space to start to verbalize those things in their messy, complicated, complex ways. That means that when we go to have those conversations with people in our lives who we maybe want to be more considerate of, or we want to be more prepared for, we're ready for it. My younger sisters did not have an expectation of me that I do this alone for the rest of my life. But because I was unwilling or unable to have that conversation with them for so much of my development, I couldn't get the external validation I needed to remove the internal pressure. And so as we navigate how we talk about this and who we talk about it with, hopefully we get the opportunity to take those valves off a little bit and have the conversations with the people who matter to us and give them the opportunity to let us be whole, messy people too.
That was one of the main kind of takeaways we also found in the surveys, that so many people have difficulty asking for and accessing support. Having those conversations, it's so hard. Over 50% responded that it is difficult for them to ask for help. And an example of something that folks said was that they typically don't ask for help until their situation has, quote, blown up, right? And I think that's something that a lot of us are also familiar with. We also saw in the survey so many people dealing with anxiety, chronic stress, depression, loneliness. And we also saw a significant portion of respondents identified with having a disability themselves. ADHD came up a lot, and CPTSD, complex PTSD, came up as well. Another core finding was the desire people had to be able to openly discuss their feelings. Almost all respondents indicated that they had wanted to discuss certain things like resentment, grief and loss, guilt and shame. Again, this like glass child experience, the internal pressure of what it is to be the unproblematic child or the successful one or the one who is fine. And then also folks talked about future planning anxiety, and other topics folks were interested in was dealing with burnout, navigating family dynamics, boundaries. How, like, what are they and how do we set them? How do we have these conversations with our families and our loved ones? Folks also talk about, I don't know how to have these conversations as a sib with someone I'm dating, right? If I'm going to have a significant caregiving role, what does that mean for my partner? Folks also were really interested in exploring identity, like who am I outside of being a sib? And then codependency and unlearning codependency was also a big one.
It's just feels like a Pandora's box, right? And I think that's such a like metaphor for this sibling identity, this being a sib, is it can be scary to open the box because there's so much inside. But we have to. I think there's so much good that we can do for ourselves, and there's so much good that we can do for each other in sharing our experiences. There is opportunity for skill development and thinking about the future and what comes next and bringing other people into the conversation as well. We are at a perfect moment to start this conversation with as many sibs as possible and hear from all of the different kinds of sibs that are out there about what it is to walk this path, however you are walking it, and how we can help one another, not just process these feelings or deal with them or find the skills to move through them, but just to be there for one another and to validate that in each other in a way that maybe we've never had before. It certainly was a pivotal moment in my life when I started to hear other people say things that I could recognize in my own experience, and we're not doing nearly enough of that.
For me, I kind of painted this picture at the top about how I was dealing with all these stomach issues and all this stress and anxiety, and I was so busy and burnt out. Once I started being able to address those things, or address the anxiety and the over functioning and the hyper independence and actually feeling my feelings, all of those things changed. And like, my gut issues have done a complete 180 and they're so much more manageable now. And like, I did not know this life was possible. I did not know I could feel this calm and grounded ever. And it's just such a different way to move through the world that I just hope that through these different spaces, different Sibs can also start recognizing where they need more support and get that in ways that help them live a life that's more authentic to them. Do you remember we talked about the fact that Sibs are so bad at celebrating themselves often? We're just great at celebrating other people,
right,
and not great at celebrating ourselves. So I wanted to ask if you have a Sib celebration that you can share with us.
When you mentioned like being the person who never makes a decision, I was just recently with a friend who is not a sibling herself, but has been such a support to me in terms of being someone I could always just say everything to. And I was with her over the weekend, and I had spent too many days in a row, I think, saying I didn't care what we did, or, I was totally fine with anything. And so she got to the point where she was like, okay, here are two choices, and we will not do anything until you make one of these two choices. And we spent so much time really just practicing my ability to make a decision.
I love that example as even just an exercise, right? Of like, what do I want for dinner today? Like, It's truly something I still have to work on all the time. So thank you. And we definitely celebrate you in practicing that.
Yeah, I'm going to assert more and more wants. It's going to be my whole new personality trait.
I love that. And if folks who are listening or watching want to share their Sib celebrations, we would love to hear them. We can share them on future episodes as well. I would love to just see if you have anything else you want to share about the SLN specifically.
Yeah, I think if you are new to the Sibling Leadership Network, we have been around for 20 plus years now in different forms, but primarily now as a nonprofit organization that is designed to serve siblings in all the facets of their life. And we focus on evidence-based programs that are designed by and for Sibs. We have a community of researchers looking into the Sib experience and what it means at an academic level and how that can impact the ways in which policy changes and systems are built to be more supportive of siblings. There's tons of opportunities to be involved in the work that we're doing and the communities that we're building. There may be a local chapter of the SLN in your community, but even if there isn't, we have online spaces and opportunities constantly that are free for siblings to come and be with one another. And this partnership and this opportunity to be a support to Sib as a human, we see as a crucial part of that landscape of support that we hope to offer to siblings. So I'm hopeful that as you join us in the podcast space, you also start to feel supported to come and find more that the SLN has to offer as well. I am so grateful for the opportunity to come and talk. Thank you so much for creating the space and for giving me the opportunity to come and get to experience what Sib as a human is going to offer to so many other Sibs along this path.
Thank you so much, Kaitlin, for joining me today for this conversation.
And I will be a very dedicated listener to Sib as a human.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for tuning in to Sib as a Human. Please subscribe, like, rate, and comment to let us know what resonated with you. And the more engagement we have from listeners, the more we can bring to you all as well. Connect with us on Instagram at SibAsAHuman and subscribe to our Substack to be the first to know when new episodes, articles, and resources drop. All of these links are also in our show notes. We are currently making this show with very little funding, so if you feel so inclined, we have a donation page if you want to support Sibs and this project. Again, links below in the show notes. If you have ideas or other ways that we can bring this podcast and community to more people, please email us at sibasahuman@gmail.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time, and until then, be gentle with yourself.